Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very excited. I say it sincerely to have on Sam Seder, longtime host of the Majority Report, nearly 2 million subscribers on YouTube. It's noon Eastern time, 5 days a week. And Sam, it is good to see you. Thanks so much. I don't know if you've ever been on before. I interviewed maybe at Netroots Nation, standing around there, but I don't think you've ever been on formally. Thanks for being on.
I think so. I don't know. I feel like we've talked in this one way or another. We've been on each other's shows for almost 20 years now.
I met you. You were co-hosting on Air America with Jeanine Garofalo, and that's when I first met you in those studios, probably 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
So, what have you been up to the last 20 years? Have you been doing anything? No, you've been.
I've it's one long nap and basically trying to keep my kids out of trouble.
This is good. Hey, look, your show has really grown. I mean, it literally has almost 2 million subscribers just on YouTube. It's also listened to on podcasts and everything. I don't want to compare Air America to now, but do you think now in the recent years is more of a time for progressive talk radio to emerge as corporate media is really fractured into what it is now? It just keeps fragmenting, and you see a rise of more and more on the left. Or maybe it's just me. You tell me.
No, I mean, I think, I would say two things. The first thing I would say, and I feel like I've been howling at the moon about this for 15 years, but Air America's numbers were actually quite good at that time. We had 5 owners and 6 CEOs over the course of 5 years. And so our ownership, we had some real management and ownership problems. But our numbers, just our sheer numbers in terms of ratings, were good. But I also do think that now is a different era. And I think, listen, there were some of us there who saw that this was all going online in some fashion or another. And radio people are very slow to sort of make that adjustment. I mean, that's the case in any industry, that kind of change. I think people are not necessarily, people are always worried, are they going to lose their job if things change? But the other thing that I think is really different now than it was then is the attitude of Democrats towards Republicans has shifted dramatically. I mean, if you go back 15, 20 years and take a look at what Democrats' opinion was of compromise, it was a lot higher than it is now because, I mean, significantly, I'm talking like 20, 30 point, 40 point swing maybe, because I think there's a greater realization of what's been going on with the Republican Party. I mean, you got to remember, even our last Democratic president, Joe Biden, to the extent that he was aware of what he was saying at any given point, was saying stuff like, I think the fever is going to break. I mean, Obama said that throughout his terms, right. His 2 terms. Biden said this. Chuck Schumer just, 2 months ago was like, wait until Donald Trump, his approval rating drops to 40, and you're going to see all these Republicans break from him. The leadership of the Democratic Party has been completely out of touch with who they've been involved with across the aisle, I would argue, for over 20 years. Now, there's a lot of Democrats, to be sure, who, sort of pretend a little bit about it because it makes it easier for them to sort of launder their politics, which may be more conservative than the average Democratic voter, frankly. Mm-hmm. But I think for a lot of them, they were still living in 1990. And this notion of, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan and that type of thing. Right. And so I think the average Democratic voter or partisan, if you will, and lefty, broadly speaking, understands that there's not about a negotiation and that this is going to be a fight. And I think the more that people understand that, the more they engage.
It's a very interesting way of looking at it. When you actually, if you view politics as war, not the art of war, but actually a war with the other side right now, like we do, then you might engage more because you understand the stakes are higher. Like this is, because we're seeing what Trump is doing right now. It might give birth to more Democrats getting active. But it's also interesting when you talked about you had a leadership problem at Air America. I look at the Democratic Party, I see corporate media say, there is an identity crisis. I'm like, no, I talk to the base all the time. We know who we are. We have a leadership crisis. We don't have an identity. I can tell you we line up, and it's not left versus right or very liberal versus moderate. We want fighters. And some Democrats are just not designed for that. And even when they do, like Hakeem Jeffries, every now and then, like a couple of weeks ago, said, if they indict any Democratic member of Congress for what happened at the ICE facility in Newark, it's a red line. He kept saying red line. They indicted Representative McKeever. Nothing happened.
Nope,
Where's the
nothing.
red line? So I'm like, so you said the good thing, but you didn't back it up with anything. And so that's not good. That you've got to do something now.
You know what the tell for Hakeem Jeffries in particular was for me? It was at the, I don't know, January, February, early February, he said something to the effect of like, presidents come and go, but God is always here. And, without litigating the question of whether God is around or not,
Right.
If that's your attitude as a professional politician, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? Why don't you just leave it to God and then, maybe have somebody else be the Speaker of the House? But I will say that the point that you made about people engaging, with the fighting, 20 years ago, I used to say the thing about conservative is that they have this sort of attitude that there are the barbarians are at the gates, that they're always being attacked by something. Sometimes it's Muslims, sometimes it's gay people, sometimes it's trans people, and then probably circles back to Muslims. And Black people, of course, have always been there. And then, Black radicals and Blacks who are going to take the knee, and, George Floyd, and then Muslims, right, and then trans people, or women and feminists. There's always an urgent, like, not this is something we're going to have to deal with eventually. It's like they're at the gates and we need to push them out. And that, I think, that differential is much less now because people are, realize that we're in a crisis. This is urgent. And so I think people are much more engaged in politics. And I'll also say that, like, young people, when we were in our 20s, and I think I'm probably a little bit older than you, but
we're probably,
let's
not get into it.
Let's not get it. We don't need to talk about it.
Not a good business thing. Don't talk about it.
But when we were younger, when I was in college, there was still a Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And, the latitude and oxygen for talks about being a socialist were so narrow, and, or being even a leftist were so narrow. I mean, by the time, we started Air America, there were people who were like, I'm not going to identify as a liberal, not because that's considered too centrist, but rather it was considered too far to the left. I mean, Michael Dukakis was running away from that term because he was afraid of being considered too leftist.
Remember the L word?
Yes, exactly. And, I think for generational reasons, and I think for, distance from the Soviet Union existing, like, it opened up a lot of space, the Overton window, if you will, for people to entertain other ways of organizing society, and really opened up the door to critiques of capital that weren't around before. And that's, I think, a lot more engaging to people in many respects. I'm not saying that, broadly speaking, everybody shares those ideas, but certainly people borrow from them. I mean, I don't think, unless we saw a critique of capital grow, that we would have had the new sort of Brandeisian antitrust movement, even though those things are in many ways very distinct. I think one opened up the sort of the space for the other.
I'm chatting with Sam Seder, longtime host of the Majority Report, which you can catch online all the time, every day. I wanted to, you mentioned like 20 years ago with Air America. On some way, the GOP is the same if you look at broad strokes. Like they wanted less taxes for the rich. That was a big thing, less regulations. They wanted to gut programs. They always had hostility towards Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all Democratic initiatives. That's still there. Like we're dealing with that now. But there is something different. And I think it's truly different. I think it's qualitatively different, that it's substantively different. Like they have a hostility towards democracy now. And I didn't see that 20 years ago. I honestly did not. Now it really is. I mean, they just had Caroline Leavitt today, the press secretary, saying the courts have no business getting involved with what the president wants to do. Openly saying things that you're like, what are you talking about? That's Article 3 of the Constitution. You just can't say, well, no Article 3. And we're leading towards that, where their base is getting primed and marinated to reject one branch of government so Trump could be king. That's what we're angling to.
I will grant you quantitatively it's different, but qualitatively, I don't know if I agree with that because
fair enough.
I mean, I'll tell you why. Because first off, you had Dick Cheney, who was one of the chief advocates of the unitary executive theory. True. You had, I mean, I remember, I don't know if it was Cornyn or which Republican senator from Texas standing on the Senate floor. I don't know if it was 2005 or 2006, talking about black robed, priests who think that they can control things and excusing why there was violence against federal judges at that time. I mean, it was there. And look, as a Muslim, like you could see what happened in the wake of 9/11. You could see what happened with the FBI and the statutes that were passed in the wake of 9/11.
Special
registration, and the railroading of Muslims. The Fort Dix Five, for instance, and the Patriot Act. I mean, there were indications, it seems to me, and I think like you could, if you went back and looked at some of the arguments that were being made on the Supreme Court at that time, Alito was sort of hiding behind Scalia but Clarence Thomas. I mean, they were very radical. They have not changed that much. I would say the only difference is there's more of them. And
that's a good point.
And the racism,
interesting.
Yes,
now what you mean.
And the racism that they used as an electoral strategy took over the party. I mean, is basically what happened. I mean, you could see it. Remember when George Bush tried to push immigration reform?
Yeah.
And Mark Levin and Laura Ingraham, and there were marches against immigration. I mean, it was there. It was in the Republican electorate. It just, and the more they played to those people, then all of a sudden, the more those people started to run. And that's the party we have today.
Also, you just reminded me, 2000 election, how they stole the election. But the Supreme Court helped them steal the election.
There was a riot down, but Brooks Brothers riot down in Florida.
That's right.
And I will also say that I remember the night that Donald Trump came down that escalator. I was sitting in the green room at MSNBC back when I would go on. And I can't remember who was in there, but I looked up at the screen. I'm like, he's going to beat them. I didn't think he was going to beat the Democrats, but I was like, he could win this primary because the Republican Party. I mean, remember everything about George Bush, CEO president. And you had Paul Ryan going out there telling fake stories about kids coming to school and not brown bagging their lunch and creating this moral righteousness around having money. And this lack of moral righteousness around being, low income or living in poverty, which the right has been sort of nurturing for years. So Donald Trump gets on that stage as a billionaire. He's certainly one now because of his meme coins. I'm assuming maybe he was one in 2016. Nothing he says can be wrong by virtue of the fact that he's just the richest guy up there. And, I think this was the Republican. In fact, in 2006, I wrote a book that was called FUBAR, and the premise of which is this is not your father's Republican Party. Stephen Sherrill and I wrote about these free market fundamentalists and religious folk and this movement conservatism that was taking over. And that's what it's really become.
That's interesting to look back at 2006. Yeah, the seeds were all planted. I think that the difference is maybe, we're just
they
going
grew
here. It bloomed. That's exactly it. So there were still other Republicans who were more of the old school Republican. Maybe they'd make a deal with the Democrats. They'd have brandy with them in some club and throw things at the wall together and that kind of stuff. Now it's MAGA party, and the MAGA party is an anti-democratic party. Now, with all that aside, I thought it was really interesting. You did something that went viral. It was part of this debate. It's 20 Trump supporters take on one progressive is the headline. It's a Jubilee series of these debates. And you debate these young people, and it was like, you're in the middle. It's like the Coliseum, and there's flags. I'm not sure what the flags were about. I got it, but I'm like, what's the flags? But you debated these young people, and more than 6 million people have watched this in 2 months now. I'm sure even more not on YouTube. Tell people a little bit about it, because I found it intriguing. I was watching it, and you started with the DEI. What is this? Why did you do it? And how do you feel now after you did it?
I got the ask to do it sometime in I want to say, I mean, it must have been like the second or third week of December.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't know what it was. And, I went over to its page and I saw that there, I think Ben Shapiro had done one and maybe Charlie Kirk, but then I saw a bunch of other stuff. So I couldn't tell what it was, but I knew it was young people. So I asked my daughter, who is just finished her sophomore year of college, and I know it was around then because she was back for the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, should I do this? And she's like, can I swear on this?
Sure, you have to.
My daughter shouldn't, but she was like, shit, yeah, Dad, you got to do this. And I was like, all right, fine. And I did it. They, they said that you could make your own claims, that you would debate against them. So at the beginning of each sort of section, I had a contention that I asked. I said, one of them was like, unless you're, a billionaire or a religious fundamentalist or a xenophobic nationalist, you made a mistake in voting for Trump, like that type of thing. And I had no idea what to expect. I flew out there to LA. The next morning I did it and then flew back. And I walked into the room and there were 20 people in this sort of semi warehouse looking space. And I sat down and they were young people for the most part. I mean, all of them, I think. And the thing that really struck me, there were two things. One was the intersection of ignorance and confidence in some people.
Right.
And then the other was in that contention I just mentioned to you, either you're a religious fundamentalist or a xenophobic nationalist or a billionaire, or really wealthy, you should be, your vote for Trump was a mistake. Well, one guy comes up and he's challenging me on, religion, and I'm trying to figure out where's this going. And at one point I realized he's not even arguing with the contention. He's saying, I am a religious fundamentalist. I am a theocrat.
I saw that.
And I'm happy about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then a woman came up after him and said, what's wrong with being a xenophobic nationalist? And I was not anticipating having to push back on that argument. And frankly, my feeling was, I don't need to. I have confidence that the majority of Americans don't want that and aren't that. And them showing themselves in that way proves my point.
So because we saw all these studies just the other day, data again from the 2024 election about young people breaking different ways than people expected, especially because the Gen Z generation is well educated. So people thought, well, of course they're going to be more pro-Democrat. You see that among young women, but not young men, even some young men of color. So when you were debating, and I saw there were people of color that you were debating, and white people as well, or young people, can you project anything? I don't know how they found those people, but do you think it's a fair sampling of where some younger people are, or outliers?
if we were not in LA, I imagine that those 20 people would look a lot different, frankly. But I think that had something to do with it in terms of like the way they cast, and who they're looking at. But I mean, I think the answers about young people, are far more complicated. I mean, I think like part of it was, I think part of it, frankly, was Gaza for young people. I think as a first order issue, I don't know if that accounted for all those votes, but as a second order issue, where like, I know that generation is as angry about what they were seeing and what they are seeing in Gaza, more so than any other generation,
Right.
Because, it's the equivalent of what happened in Vietnam the first time that images from war are being broadcast on television. There was a quality, to what's going on in Gaza that, we certainly didn't have like in the Iraq War, for instance. I mean, I would imagine, had we had social media during the Iraq War and we were able to see, and I think frankly, the type of targeting of civilians that's happening in Gaza is, in some ways far more dramatic, or deliberate. But if we had seen images coming back from Iraq, I suspect the level of accountability that Democrats were held to would have been higher. I mean, a lot of people got away with
very interesting,
with a lot of like, by 2006, or 2008, 2006, you could come out against the war. Well, I think I think Democrats would have had a bigger problem with the war had they not, had there been more images of what was going on in Afghanistan and Iraq in terms of like civilians. So I think that was part of what happened with young people. And I think the other thing that happened with young people is like, you had a Democratic Party that had a like very mixed message, and these younger people didn't live through Donald Trump as adults. And so they didn't, the sense of Donald Trump being a problem was just not as, people our age, we really understood how problematic Donald Trump was and could be, particularly like, with something like Project 2025 and 4 years of exile to figure it out. But I don't think younger people had a sense of that. And because of the Democrats in some respects, we're hoping that would carry them across the line. I think that was a problem.
That's very interesting. I've never heard anyone say that. I'm talking about Sam Seder. The idea that if the Iraq War was broadcast to us on our phones on a daily basis, how would it have affected American support for the war, and how there's probably been a political divide much quicker on it, where we're like, look what we're doing.
Yeah.
We hear things like we've killed 100,000 civilians, and we're like, maybe, and every now and then you'd see a story. I remember seeing maybe Al Jazeera or something, someone would show me, and a person is speaking in Arabic, and someone would translate it. My Arabic's too limited about what's going on. I'm like, this is awful. And I'm like, I hope this is the exception, what we're seeing. And it probably wasn't. But Gaza, we're seeing it nonstop, and it continues. I know you covered a lot on your show, and you've always been outspoken on it. I mean, I always remember from 20 years, the first time I was on your show with Janine, I just met you, but I just come back from the West Bank and talked about it. It was in 2004, 2005. I had done comedy there and shared it on your show. But so before we wrap up, like when we're seeing now what's going on in Gaza and beyond that, my cousins live in the West Bank. I just saw some over the weekend who said the West Bank is frightening in levels they've never seen it. The PA doesn't even exist anymore. It's just on paper. The Israeli military is patrolling it, and the settlers are emboldened in ways they've never seen.
And today, I think they've actually now have
20
new settlements that they have legalized and, or legalized in the context of Israeli law.
Well, and Bet Salem, which is a great human rights group, they're in the article in The Guardian, they said point blank that they said Israel continues to promote Jewish supremacy through the theft of Palestinian land, and ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. And there's an Israeli official saying on record, we're doing this to end any hope of a Palestinian state ever happening. This is why we're going to build these new 20 settlements around there. Now, maybe they don't get built, or maybe they do get built, but it's a different time. And how do you, on your show, I mean, what's the reaction when you talk to people? See, I'm a Palestinian heritage, so it's rare. I'm very sympathetic to people who call in and they're Democrats and they're more pro-Israel. And I'm not anti-Israel. I'm not anti a country. I'm anti-policies of a country. If Israel was a country that was one where it really was a mirror, if it really was happening the way people in their mind believe Israel's happening and this pluralistic state, it would be different, but that's not the reality of what's going on. So what do you hear from listeners to your show? And
there have been, like you say, I've been pretty critical of Israel for, publicly, to the extent that I've had a platform for 20 years. And I think really about, I want to say, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I almost like stopped engaging because I thought on some level, like Israeli society has passed the Rubicon. Like they had gone too far to be able to correct things. And I may have been even 15, 20 years too late on that assessment. But within the context of my, personal journey as someone who was raised to believe Israel, I don't want to say to deify Israel, but to, it was taught Israel as an element of my Jewish identity was huge. I went to Hebrew school in the 70s. It was 1/3 Israel, 1/3 Holocaust, and 1/3 Jewish culture and Hebrew language. And, we had Holocaust survivors who were our teachers, and Israel was the finish of that sentence.
Right.
Essentially. And, but I think, particularly early on, there was a lot more pushback from people, but I don't think, that people can see what's going on with any type of even close to open eyes and not recognize that A, what's going on there is a genocide, and B, that it emanates out of an ideology of supremacy, of Jewish supremacy. And I hesitate to use, I will say, I believe they practice a Jewish supremacy. The idea of Zionism and Judaism being equated, I find to be wrong and problematic. And it's simply historically ahistorical. It's not. There were a lot of movements in Europe that were, the Bund, the Jewish Bund, was vehemently anti-Zionist because it could see where it would lead, and that it was a Jewish supremacy that involved, expropriating people's land. So I don't know if I would describe myself as anti-Israel per se, but I'm pretty against the way that Israel is founded and functions as a country. And I think even from like I am open to a two-state solution if that's what the Palestinian people want. But I think I look at Israel and I think there needs to be a multi-ethnic democracy there.
Right.
And because right now, let's face it, we have a one-state solution. It is a one state. It just so happens to be an apartheid state with varying degrees of apartheid that's going on, and some that may, and that go to ethnic cleansing as well. I mean, so that's what exists now. And the question is, okay, how do you make that not an apartheid state? And so
that's the challenge, right? And the settlements are Jewish only. And I hate to say that because I don't want to bring in the Jewish faith into it, because it really is right-wing Israel only. That's really, but they are under the umbrella of doing it because they're Jewish. But the settlements, even if you're an Israeli or a Christian or Muslim, because I have friends who went, they can't get in because there's boards that don't let them in. So they really are. It's actually, that's why B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights group, says it's Jewish supremacy. And because they're Jewish and they're saying these are Jewish supremacists. And Ben Gvir and Smotrich in the administration and Netanyahu, but these younger guys, clearly supremacists like we have white supremacists. And I don't know I don't know what the future is for both people. This is just uglier and uglier. And, my family in the West Bank, they're on the verge, the settlers of taking their land. They already took my grandmother's land, but that was a generation ago. This is now they're trying to take my family's farmland because the settlers came from, a lot of them from the US, from Brooklyn and stuff. Yep. And they go, well, we're superior, you're inferior, we're taking your land. It's unbelievable to see this happening now. It's 2025.
Yeah, I am also really curious, and waiting for some type of like research or real in-depth writing on the implications of bringing immigrants from the former Soviet Union, where they have grown up in an authoritarian state, a right-wing authoritarian state, and and have made up the bulk of immigration in the West Bank in particular, as a way of creating facts on the ground. I mean, this has been building for 30 years, 40 years. The Israelis have been, we're just going to keep doing this and doing this and doing this until it becomes too big to fail, essentially, and too hard to unwind. And that's why I think a one state, a multi-ethnic state, because again, it is one state and they're claiming that's what they want. And okay, but then you have to be judged if you're going to have huge swaths of your population in your one state who don't have rights, and some who don't even have the right to eat. Then you're a pariah state in my mind.
That's what I mean. Before we wrap up, I mean, things that we've seen in Gaza is like something I would have thought I would see like in World War I. And you're like, how did the world let that happen? What happened to humanity at that time? And we've watched this play out now. October 7th, horrific terrorist attack. What has flowed for that now for almost 2 years? Indefensible on every level. And that's why Netanyahu's charged with war crimes. It's literally war crimes. It's not an exaggeration. It's not politics, not spin. I say, as someone who's a lawyer, who's followed the law, aren't you a lawyer too, Sam?
I went to a year of law school and was raised by lawyers. So
that's good enough.
I come off as a lawyer.
You and Kim Kardashian, somehow she graduated some kind of law school, she claimed last week, because we do on my show a weekly weekend review. It took her 6 years. I'm not sure what it was. It was a homeschool law school or some sort. I'm not sure.
I'll do that. I'll do that just to be able to say it, carry on the tradition in my family.
Well, Sam, you're doing a great tradition with your show, The Majority Report. And thank you. I mean, we chatted longer than I expected, but it's great chatting with you, my friend. And
it's great to catch up.
Hopefully between now and maybe 20 years, you'll come back on, maybe God willing, inshallah.
Exactly.
You'll come on in maybe in a year. And I'm going to send information about my fiance, Hen, who's doing a one-person show about being a Palestinian born in Israel. She's raised in Israel. And what it's like, it's going to be in New York in the fall. And I'll send you.
I would love to see that. That sounds fascinating.
It's a unique story. People haven't seen the story of the Palestinian who's Israeli and that the Israelis don't want her and the Arabs don't want her because it says Israel on her passport. So this kind of
Right.
weird world where and then in America, no one likes her. So it's a whole different thing, so it's both things going on. But so Sam, people check out your show, The Majority Report, every day, YouTube, noon. It's live, right?
Yeah, we do it
Also
noon
podcast as well?
every day, and it's available as a podcast wherever you get your audio podcasts. We do 3 hours live, and then it's available as a pod. The first hour is for free for folks. And
the other two, it's a layaway plan. You can overtime, you can pay for it. You can
overtime, you can pay for it, or you can come watch it live on YouTube.
Oh, that's great.
We take calls. We take IMs.
I've seen it. I've watched it many times. No, I think you're doing a great job. I'm not kidding. You and your co-host are doing a great job. It's really entertaining, very interesting. And you really, I was watching some of the interview, I think with Ezra Klein, Abundance, the book about that. I was watching some of that and some of the stuff in the Middle East. Sincerely, you do great stuff.
And Emma Vigeland, my co-host, she's fantastic. Yes. So
thank you, my friend. Have a great day.
Thanks. Appreciate it.